So the session for today, as it's been sort of shaped up by Melissa and the team, is advocacy, media, and messaging. So my background before coming to VCOSS and being in this role for the last couple of years was primarily as a journalist. So I started off in ABC radio and sort of floated around the public broadcaster for a number of years. Did some time in television, sort of TV production at the Project and other places. For my sins, I worked at the Herald Sun, was my university job while studying RMIT journalism. But all of those places, you know, imperfect though they are in their different ways, have given me sort of a quite broad grounding in the media space, which I'm always grateful for. And then I've been more in a communications, advocacy, campaigning sort of role since I've been in the community sector at VCOSS and other places. So hopefully I bring a sort of breadth of experience, which is useful and which you can tap into and take away some sort of insights and things you might be able to apply in your own advocacy. So maybe just a note on like, what is advocacy? You know, I'm taking us right back to basics here, but advocacy is, you know, the business of changing minds, ultimately. It's about getting people or organizations to do the thing you want or to stop doing the thing you don't want. At the end of the day, we're about changing minds and persuading people. And I just say that right at the top to note that media is a part of that. So media is sort of a little subset tactic of advocacy, but advocacy is the big picture. Advocacy is sort of the whole game. And messaging, which I love and we'll get into shortly, is the art of crafting the words and the framing and the metaphors and all the sort of beautiful things that go into shaping up our message to make it the most effective it can be. So advocacy, media, messaging, they're sort of interrelated, but advocacy really is the umbrella term I just want to nominate there. Just a bit of a warning. I'm obviously going to be stepping us through some of the challenges we face as advocates and trying to engage with organizations such as media outlets. And as we all know, that is an imperfect space. So part of the role I'm going to try and play today is to describe some of those quite flawed systems and structures as they currently exist in our world today. And play the role of seeking to explain at times how others think, or the biases they may have, the ableism they may bring to a conversation or an engagement. So I'll sort of be playing that role to an extent. I don't want you to think when I'm saying, you know, newsrooms might have this point of view or journalists might see it this way, that that's me saying that or VCOSS saying that. But I will just try and, you know, put on that hat of those other parties so we can tease out some of those challenges that we face when we engage with these kinds of people and organizations. So just a brief content warning there. So as I said, advocacy at its heart is the business of persuasion. We want to change somebody's mind. That's the key goal, really, and everything else sits under that. All the nitty-gritty, all the tactics, what we want, you know, the our actual vision for change sits under that. There's a trap though. There's a big trap, and the trap is that we as advocates think we are right and know we are right, and we rightly are so convinced of our worldview. We go out there saying, you know, a lot of the time, this is how it is. And sometimes, I know I do, we get frustrated when others don't see it exactly in our terms or, you know, in the way we're trying to portray it. So being right in advocacy isn't enough. So we don't want to just be right. We know we're right, okay? But that's not enough. We want to also be persuasive. And that's the next step. Being right, you know, and there's the question on the screen there, which says, you know, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? Ideally, in a perfect world, we make our case and it's so clear, it's so obvious, it's so compelling that people say, oh, of course, I didn't see it that way and now I do, and therefore I will change my behavior or I will fund that program or whatever it may be. In the real world, it's just not how it happens. The act of persuading is bigger and harder than just being right. But that's a trap for all of us, and I know I sort of fall into that trap as well. But it can be self-defeating if you go in with the mindset of I'm right, I'm so obviously right. Why can't others see it as I see it? It's just a trap. It's a really big thing, but we'll step through that shortly as well. Um, a big challenge, another big challenge for all of us as advocates, and there's a picture I've just brought up on the screen, which is a sort of cartoon of a purple person looking quite downtrodden with slumped shoulders, and there's swirling arrows and thought bubbles and all sorts of busyness around their face and their body. And this is a visual sort of interpretation of the attention economy, as it's been called in the modern world. And that is to say, there are just so many things demanding our attention, things distracting us, issues weighing down upon us, and it's swirling all around us. And I don't know about you, but I feel that sometimes that there's just so much going on. It's hard to actually know what to listen to or what to engage with. And even if you do know, having the mental, bandwidth to do that or the emotional space to do that is sometimes just really, really, really hard. And this is true. Like I feel this, and I think this is something that we all experience just as individuals. But in terms of advocacy, when we want to cut through with what's going to be our message and our advocacy message, this is just a really big challenge. People are distracted, overwhelmed, and then we come at them saying, hey, let's talk about this issue that you may not have ever thought about before or may not already have a relationship with. And it's just a big and an increasingly significant challenge in the modern world to get their attention, which is the starting point for having that hopefully persuasive conversation. This has really been borne out, and we'll delve into media in a bit of detail momentarily. But in a modern trend which is developed, and that is of news aversion. I've just brought up a bar graph. Bar graph, I think it's a bar graph, horizontal bars, and it's basically measuring the extent to which people actively avoid different kinds of news. So the top level sort of entry in this bar graph is what's described as social justice news, race, gender, inequality, LGBTQ plus rights, etc. And that has 36% of people in this group saying they actively avoid news on that topic. And the other items in that list, some more concerning than others, sport and entertainment and celebrity, maybe we don't care too much about that. The war in Ukraine is a massive thing that people are just avoiding at the moment. But then other ones that, are probably closer to our hearts, climate change and the environment, health, as a broad topic, politics, you can go down the list, crime and safety and the like. The point about this is that people are avoiding these topics for whatever reason in their own life. And that makes it hard for us to reach them. But to take it to that next level, news organizations, when we come to them saying, hey, how about you do a story on XYZ, they have this in their heads. They get amazing, rich data on what their viewers, listeners, audience click on or read or play and what they don't. So that's not to say, and I'm definitely not saying, that we can't be pitching and having success in these areas. We absolutely must. That's our challenge as advocates. But we also just have to acknowledge that the big trends are against us. The big trends are against us because people, and therefore media organizations, are moving away from stories and coverage in these areas. It's a massive challenge that we're dealing with. This won't all be bad news, I promise. We'll get to the good stuff soon. Part of the good stuff is that increasingly what we talk about as, media or communications is growing and growing in amazing ways. So mainstream traditional media, I could talk all day about and the challenges they're facing and how that world has changed for them. But there are all these other forms of media around that didn't exist not that long ago. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. I've brought up just a simple chart, I guess, or graph mentioning, TV, radio, newspapers. So they're the old traditional legacy media. and magazines in that as well. But also, social media is just so important and so dominant. I know you all know this. Digital media in all its different forms, video content, things that didn't exist a while ago that now do exist, and most importantly, we can control. So the gatekeepers aren't as dominant or even don't even exist in the way they do for those traditional media outlets. So that's really good. That's really positive for us. It gives us more avenues for our advocacy and for our engagement with the people we want to reach and the people we want to persuade. I will just for the next few moments stick with the sort of more traditional media though, because even though it's not the only thing going these days and there's more, it is still dominant. It is still such a critical way to reach people and to advocate a cause, and especially if we're talking about this in the political realm, if we're trying to lobby politicians or change public policy, for better or worse, politicians still obsess about what is in the newspaper. They still obsess about what is on the 6 p.m. TV news, and the radio shows on 3RW or ABC in the morning. They do. And one of the reasons they do it, and I don't judge them for this, is because they know that those legacy media organizations, while declining in their audience, still set the agenda and set the conversation for all the others. So a good example of this recently is the Let Them Be Kids campaign to ban social media for young people under 16 years of age. That started as a campaign by News Limited, in the Daily Telegraph and the Herald Sun. They ran it as a campaign and it started a conversation. It got people talking. Suddenly, other bits of media and the communication information ecosystem are talking about it. The politicians jump on it. It develops a head of steam, and it now looks like a thing which may actually happen. So they know that if you get in the newspaper, the radio, and the TV, it gets you other places too. That's a lesson for us as well. It's a declining media, but it's still a really important one because it has that ripple effect. So how do we engage with that traditional media? So the first thing is to do a bit of research, and this puts labor on us, and I'm just going to acknowledge that up front. But again, this is getting us back to, do we want to be effective? So I'm going to go through what we need to do to be effective. So the first thing is to know actually what the media wants. It's to know what the media needs, and it's for us to give them as much as we can. Now, by know what the media wants, what I'm talking about there is actually knowing the kinds of stories a media organization writes, and the kinds they don't. When I look at different newspapers or different radio programs or whatever, you get a sense for, oh, they do some work in this area, but they don't really do that. Or, oh, gee, a lot of age stories in the Age these days, have a big photo of somebody. I know that's something they need to get a story up. So you sort of need to know the kinds of stories they like to tell, because it's going to help you approach an appropriate media organization to try and pitch your story. And we'll go to pitching in a moment also. To know what the media needs, what I mean there is to understand the components, the building blocks of a story. A story isn't just us, like I mentioned at the top, saying, here's a big issue and we think this about it. Can you please do a story on it? Just not enough. There are different components, and I'll go through it on the next slide, that are really required for a journalist or a news editor or a producer to say, right, I've got enough to turn this into a story. And then the last one as an action is to give them as much as you can. So once we've worked out, the kind of thing they like, all the building blocks they need, to give them as much as you can. And I've worded that carefully because obviously, for reasons we all know, we can't just go out there and give a journalist the world, because we need to protect ourselves at times. We need to protect the people we represent, work with, advocate for, whatever it may be. So you can't always, and nor should you, just open up the doors and let a journalist into everything. But as much as you can, it's in your interest to do so. So Here is a glorious picture of a hamburger with the lot. Meat, cheese, all the salads, two sesame seed buns. This is my always go-to metaphor for what I want to give a journalist. When I'm approaching or pitching to a journalist, I want to give them a burger with the lot. I want to give them everything they need, and preempt, their questions about other things that might be required. So a summary list of what that might include is a new angle. This sounds terrible because once again, sometimes a lot of the issues we talk about as advocates, and this is a big challenge, aren't new. They've got long tails, long histories, big legacies, and that's the problem a lot of the time for us, right? That these things have been going on for so long unaddressed, or going on for so long, without a particular remedy being applied. But from a news point of view, we need to find a new thing, a new bit. That's a challenge for us, but it's one we have to rise to meet if we're going to have cut through in these areas. A clear narrative. I'll step through this a bit when we get to messaging, but the story must be clear that you're pitching. If there's sort of just 1,000 thought bubbles and a bunch of info and a link to a report from the Productivity Commission, if it's sort of all a bit everywhere, a journo is just going to look at that and go, I don't know what this is. There's too much here. Move on. Journos and newsrooms get literally hundreds of emails a day, like hundreds. And they will tell you they can't read all of them. Don't even read all of them. So your pitch, when you make a pitch, has to be really clear, really concise, which leads me to that next point, the sort of aha information. And we've probably all experienced this in meetings or conversations where someone says something and you go, I didn't know that. That's fascinating. If we can find one of those little aha moments, those little aha nuggets of information, and be able to infuse it into our advocacy, it's going to serve us in good stead. The next couple on my list here are some of those ones that are harder to get, but pictures are really important to journalists. Photos, the ability to do maps, videos, whatever it may be. It's just baked into the way the media works that if there's pictures, and good pictures is kind of like journo lingo, go a long way. And I know a lot of you are very attuned to this. I see Julie on the call, and I think, and maybe we'll speak about it later, the advocacy you do in the tram corridor in the sort of inner north, and some of the amazing visuals that come out of that. It shouldn't have to require pretty pictures to get our advocacy message up, but it does. Case studies are the next one on this list. They're very complicated for reasons I think we all probably understand. People with different levels of experience and comfort telling their story, different abilities to do so, and just different vulnerabilities as well. But from a media standpoint, that is probably the number one question a journalist will ask of you. You got a case study. And when they say case study, they mean someone, almost without exception, they mean somebody who's happy to be identified and photographed / videoed. They don't mean the way we sometimes do when we're talking about written reports or, policy documents of a de-identified, person's experience with the name being changed. When a journo talks about a case study, they want someone they can see and their audience can engage with. And it's a pretty blunt question, Journos, like, I get texts every day saying, do you have a case study for this? Do you have a case study for that? And I'm often just like, no, I don't. Like, these are people. I don't have them on tap. But the journo's asking it because they know their story will get a better run if it has an actual human involved. It adds a relatability to a story, which helps them get their story up internally. Available talent, similar thing, but that could include, a person speaking about their lived experience, or an expert, somebody commenting on a policy reform or something else, but, sort of in the same bucket there. And the last one is just speed and responsiveness. And there's a massive double standard here. But journos, if you're engaging with a newsroom to try and get a story up, they need you to be quick and responsive. They're not always quick and responsive to us, but they hold the power in this relationship. If we want to be effective in this space, we need to be quick and responsive to them. It's just the way it is. So just to sort of recap that, know what the journo or the outlet wants. My advice is to pitch via email or text, unless you have a pre-existing relationship with a journo and you can give them a call. But if you don't, email or text is best, because they can sort of read it in their own time, I guess. Have a great subject line if you're doing an email. This is so important. Like, this has an outsized importance in this game. And on my next slide, I'll show you some examples of a good and a bad one. Much like on this slide, I'm using dot points on this slide. Dot points are your friend in a media pitch. A big wall of text, if you're emailing a newsroom, again, they'll just go, oh, well, I don't know what this is. And it might not get read. It might go straight to the recycle bin. Dot points with your key points are really, really, really important. And this last one, like frame, I've written frame or write your pitch as you could realistically see it written by a journo. This is a massive thing for me. Whenever I'm pitching to a journo, I write it in their style. And I sort of like, I've been around the game a while, so I sort of know what I'm doing here. But if a journo can read a pitch and go, oh, I would hardly even have to change this. I could just put this straight in the internal pitch meeting doc, and this could go straight in the rundown for tonight's thing, or, that just makes their life easier. And at the end of the day, rightly or wrongly, if we make their life easier, we're more likely to get a run. So those subject lines, this is one from, and I've done a shout out in the bottom left there, Emily Rice, who's a fantastic former Channel 9 journo, and she does these great LinkedIn posts about advice for people pitching to newsrooms. If you go and look up Emily, she's wonderful. But this was a real life recent example from her. And the first subject line, I've got two subject lines on the screen here. The first one is Artho 1234 now on the market, Australia's first miracle cure for arthritis. And that was the subject line that came through. Really bad, in her opinion, and I agree, because it doesn't really tell you what's on offer. It doesn't really tell you much. The revised version that she recommended is story op, new effective Aussie arthritis cream, local patient available. So straight off the bat, anyone in a newsroom reading that will go, oh, okay. So it's an arthritis cream. It just put it into everyday language. Excellent. There's a local patient available. It's new. Even just using that word Aussie is an example of writing it the way a newsroom would. So as best we can, we're going to try and tailor what we can do to the newsrooms. Which brings me to the sort of second half of what I want to go through. I realize I'm probably running over time here, Melissa, but I'll fly through these next bits. Nope, thumbs up. Excellent, great. Actual framing of the language and the message we wish to deliver is so critical. So I'm moving away from the pure media engagement piece here. Message framing is about everything we do. It infuses all of our advocacy, all of our everything, really. It's just an underpinning. And at its heart, it says that, how we say things matter. Not just what we're saying, but how we say them is a massive part of that. And to distill it down even more, to quote, a great leader in this space, words mean things. It sounds obvious, but sometimes we forget this and we use, not optimum words for persuasion. And I'll go through what I mean by that. It's a duplicate slide. So, as we know, and I know, especially in the disability space, language is so contested because words mean things and they come with meanings. They come with infused meaning, which may not be obvious or may only be obvious to some people, but not others. And it makes it a very complicated space. It's what makes language beautiful in some regards because it can be so powerful. But it also means if we're choosing the wrong words, then we're not going to be as effective, or we're going to be, saying something unspoken that we don't mean to. Either way, it's something we really just need to, be attuned to. One example, I often hear is, and the words on the screen now are, Aisha fell over. And normally from that, we get the sense of a trip or some sort of incidental something. Someone fell over, I actually fell over this morning. I tripped over my dog this morning. It wasn't a good sight for anyone to see. But the other way to say the exact same thing, but actually just means something radically different, is Aisha had a fall. Now, falling over and having a fall, in theory, are the exact same thing. But I know when we say those sentences differently, or when I choose one sentence over the other, it gives people a different picture in their mind of exactly what we're talking about. We may be led to have conclusions in our mind about the age of the person by having a fall, or or their physicality or their mobility or whatever it may be. None of that is written on the page or written on the screen, but it's in our own internal biases. It's in our own sort of knowledge of language. So we just need to be aware when we use words that they mean different things, whether we want them to or not. Another prime example, especially in the social sector, hard to reach communities is a phrase that comes up a lot. I hate it. It's a terrible phrase. It blames the communities for not being communicated with. Poorly communicated with communities is getting some traction at the moment. Again, it's making an attempt to sort of do it a bit better, but it's a bit clunky. I don't love it. Underserved communities is now sort of getting some traction. None of these are perfect, which sort of speaks to the complexity of language. But again, attempts are being made to try and actually say what we want in a way that conveys the meaning we desire without any unforeseen or negative meanings or inferences coming through. A slightly different example, there's this whole thing in communication of show the benefits, not the product. No one cares if your little, battery charger pack that you carry in your backpack so your phone doesn't die on the train. No one cares if that has so many megahertz of this and, can store so many gigawatts of that. What they care about is you can charge your phone 3 times, or you can go 4 days without your phone dying. It makes it real to the person. So showing the benefits, not the product or the process, is a big part here. So if we see, 20 minutes quicker on the Princess Freeway, this is some real messaging that came out of some of the state government sort of roadwork projects of late. But the Andrews and now Ellen government's quite good at this messaging. We talk about their skill in communication, but they have banners all up and down. What is the tunnel out west of get home 20 minutes quicker. That's so much more real to someone than the Princess Freeway taking 20 minutes to clear in peak time. Getting home 20 minutes quicker. It's the same thing, but it sounds real to me. And Dan Andrews, when he was Premier, even had this whole series of tweets, which I loved, or, social posts about get home before your kids go to bed. It's the same message, but suddenly it resonates in a way. And I have a vision of arriving home. The WorkSafe did an amazing ad campaign a couple of years ago where I don't think they even filmed anything in a workplace. They just had a worker arriving home. That was it, getting home safe. And implied in that is they, didn't get injured or killed at work. So it forces, once we put our head in this space, it just forces us to think in different ways about communicating our message. So we know we're right. We know we should get, the freeway should run better, but like framing it differently will make us more effective. So that's the challenge for us as advocates. There's a loose formula here, which isn't perfect, but it serves us pretty well, of values, villain, vision. And what this essentially means is that, and this is sort of the secret sauce of how we can construct good messaging. You need to find a value which others are going to share with you, a shared value with your audience. This is going to help us cut through that information, attention economy, everyone being overwhelmed and avoiding news. Values cut through. So we need to find what is the value that underpins our advocacy and our vision of a better world that others are going to share. Because if we can tap into that and make that connection, we're on a good starting point. And, hopefully we grab their attention, which is the first hurdle. Villain might be overstating it, but I love alliteration. But villain is, a barrier, an obstacle. What's in the way? We talk about this a lot, in metaphor and, physical ways in the disability space, but like what is actually stopping the thing that we want to have happening? What is in the way? What is the obstacle? What is the blocker? Whatever it may be. One of the challenges sometimes is us as advocates not actually knowing what that is. We might think, if the government's not committing to a particular course of action, we might just say, well, the government doesn't care, or the government doesn't understand it, or whatever. Now, that might be the case. Or there may be something else there. The government may be listening to this interest group over here too much, or the government might have got some bad advice over here, or genuinely, the government might think, well, if I do that, it's going to have this perverse impact over there, and that's what's stopping them. So actually working out what the obstacle is actually a big part of advocacy. Because if we don't know what it is, or we have a misunderstanding ourselves of what the obstacle is, how are we ever going to convince someone to overcome it? It gets very, very hard. And the last one is the vision. We actually need to know what we want. It's not good enough to point at problems and say it's a problem, the government should do something, or it's a problem, isn't this untenable? We actually need to know what we want to be the solution or the desired outcome. So like a really quick example of that in the housing space is, everybody needs a place to live. It's impossible to argue with. Everybody does need a place to live. We can get onto a debate about, well, sure, okay, but then like what houses, where, and who builds them, and who owns them, and public and private, and all those things. But if you start with a bedrock of common values, you're going to be off on a good place. So there's lots of different ways people shape up values. I've thrown some examples on the screen, but things that generally all people would value, time with family and friends, health, education for our children. I'd expand that to almost anything that cares and nurtures our children. We all seem to agree is a good thing. A reliable job. I won't read the whole list, but like there's a bunch of things that we can basically all agree are good. So we need to sort of infuse our advocacy with that. I'll give you a real world example though. A couple of years ago, we had the marriage equality plebiscite. Now, it wasn't that long before we had that plebiscite that marriage equality wasn't a phrase. It didn't exist. We talked about gay marriage. We talked about, I can't remember what we're talking about now, but marriage equality was actually a creation of the Yes campaign to say that this is not about, no, it's the creation of the marriage equality what became the marriage equality campaign, because they decided, and their research told them, that the notion of equality everyone agrees with. If you start talking, or if you continue talking about gay marriage, it's suddenly something about, I'm going to use the language, but, gay people, or it's suddenly something about marriage, which, people will say it's an institution, it's about the church, it's about history and, Western democracy and all these things. When they said, no, it's not about any of that, it's about equality. Very hard to argue with equality. And from that basis of a shared value, that's when they can make their other arguments. It was a really subtle but significant framing, and it worked really, really well. So I'm actually not going to, I've got a few examples here, which I normally use in this presentation, but I actually suspect you're going to be all over it, because working out a villain, and I've got on the screen here an example of the medical model and the social model. The medical model, it says on the screen, I need to be fixed to fit in with society, and the social model being, of course, as we know, society needs to change so I can fit in and fully participate. There's other examples which I won't go through, but working out who the villain is, this is just an example of that. And I think, the disability community and disability advocates have done a phenomenal job of this over recent years, decades, really, reframing this. So there've been some standout champions, but it's a really good example, and actually a model that we use for others about how they can reframe and reshape their advocacy. The vision, so what do we want? This is really big. If you come to government or a policymaker or a power holder and say there are all these problems, they're going to go, well, great, so what? But you need to be able to point to that thing and say, this is what we need to have happen. There's an old off-quoted cliche, and there's a giant picture now on the screen of Martin Luther King, giving his famous "I have a dream" speech. And he had a dream. He had a vision, that one day his 4 little children, I won't do the whole thing, but, will live in a society where they're not going to be judged by the color of their skin. He didn't come out and give a speech saying, discrimination is real and still exists, and I'm persecuted in ways X, Y, Z. That was all there in his advocacy. And again, he would have been right to list all that. But what he did was came out with the goal of persuading and saying, I have a dream. Here is my positive vision. Come with me. And that was really, really effective. I won't step too much through this next example, which I've just brought up on screen, but as we go to shape our advocacy messages, the whole value, villain, vision can actually become a loose format for any writing you do, any policy document, any media release, any social media post. You can actually lay out, and I can send these examples around through Melissa, but you can actually write out and color code your advocacy messages in those three streams, and they'll need a bit of workshopping, but it's a pretty good starting point. And we might get into that when we do the workshop section momentarily. Very quickly, just a shout out to metaphors. Metaphors are so important because, like the language I spoke about earlier that's imbued with meaning, metaphors are all about unspoken meaning. It's about meaning a thing that you're not saying explicitly. So one we use a lot and justice advocates use a lot is the quicksand of the criminal justice system. And as soon as I say that word quicksand, or at least for me, I have visions of people being stuck in things, of people being unable to escape from things and of being damaged by those things. I also know that, someone being stuck in quicksand isn't their fault. So I've imbued this meaning of not blaming the individual, of it being a systemic challenge, of people needing assistance, or needing rather to be free from this thing that's caught them. So metaphors are really powerful. There's lots that are common in advocacy and they're worth knowing, and you'll see them around the place once you start to think critically and analyze this stuff. But, reprogramming the economy, where, and I've got a list of these on the screen at the moment, reprogramming the economy, economic tracks, not just economic, but, we hear politicians all the time saying we're on the right track or the wrong track, or we're going to change tracks. Like, these are metaphors because they mean something to us. And there's the other examples on the screen there are economic network and renovating the economy. One of the most famous ones in Australia, and the pictures come up here saying Medicare, and there's two cartoon people holding a giant safety net. It's almost become part of the phrasing, the Medicare safety net. It means something to us. Another really important one, especially to do with regulation, when we're seeking to have things regulated better, is guardrails. I've just brought up a picture of a freeway, a mountain on one side, but a body of water on the other. And there are guardrails there to stop people or cars falling in. It's really powerful. It's really powerful. We sort of know what that means and we have a relationship with it already. And to put that in a real context, like this guardrail metaphor's getting used quite a lot at the moment in the United States.
Remember, 2 months ago, the United States Supreme Court basically told the former president that he will effectively be immune no matter what he does in the White House. But think about that. Think about what that means. So before, at least, there was some threat of consequence. And now the court has made this decision. Think about that. Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails.
So Donald Trump with no guardrails is getting, and they've messaged, they would have focus grouped and message tested this within an inch of its life, and that's the message that resonates. I'm going to skip a few slides here because I really want to not run out of time for our group session. So these are just photos without context I'm going through at the moment. Ignore them. The one I did want to mention just before we conclude, or I conclude this section, is about data. We love data and we love evidence-based policy, and the two go together, but sometimes we think data is going to win the day, going to win the argument, and data alone will convince people of things. And I'm just here to tell you, sadly, that's not true. If people are being completely rational and they're only looking at the evidence, then great, but that's just not how politicians or policy making work. So if we're using data, and we should use data, we not only have to present the data, but we have to explain what it means, what the data shows, the story the data tells. And it's all about putting it back in that human context or that relatable context. there's an old saying, you know, don't come to a knife fight with a spreadsheet. And I've got a cartoon here of two kids having a fight with knives, which they shouldn't be, but they are. But well, one's holding a knife and the other is holding a representation of an Excel spreadsheet. Um, you know, we're trying to persuade here, and data alone won't do it. Last one, actually, one more, and then I'm going to finish up. And because I think this is really important, I suspect I haven't mentioned it outright, but I suspect we're going to be talking a lot about, you know, the NDIS and related issues in the next half hour. Cost savings. Cost is another big issue, and in advocacy, it's a big trap because making something appear cheaper or more cost effective is a trap. So, you know, I've got a justice example here, but, you know, we often hear the thing said that, well, you know, putting something in prison costs $20,000 a day when we could be doing all these other things for cheaper. Um, the problem is that if I go back to what I was saying about values earlier on, saving money, like cost cutting for government, isn't really a value everyone agrees on. At least there are better values. So if we're making a campaign or messaging in this sort of cost savings frame, what we're actually doing is posing an unspoken question. And that is that if things could be done for cheaper, they'd be all right. Like our only issue with things is that they cost a lot of money. We know that's not true, but we're saying it in an unintentional way. And to go to this justice example, you know, if putting people in prison costs a lot of money, what we're really saying is people shouldn't be in prison, or, you know, there should be better policies around when people go to prison. But by saying it's bad because it costs money, well, what if it could be cheaper? And in South Korea, they're now actually like a lot of the jobs in prisons are being done by autonomous robots, and they're saving a lot of money. And suddenly, prison sending someone to prison doesn't cost as much money. Now, do we say, well, great, prison's cheaper now, so isn't that fantastic? Of course we don't. But we laid a trap for ourselves because we went in the economic frame, we went in the cost saving frame, and someone worked out a way to make it cheaper. So if you go back to the marriage equality example, equality is a beautiful bedrock value frame, and you're not going to get tripped up by someone saying, well, we can do it better and cheaper and different. I hope that makes sense. This has been a sort of whirlwind tour, but if you take nothing away from just this portion of my session, it's that words mean things. They are complex, they are nuanced, they're beautiful in that regard. So the more time we can invest in shaping up and framing and testing the way we say things, how we say things, the better that's going to serve us as we try and be advocates in our own space. So look, that's the end of my sort of formal presentation.